There was a time, not that long ago, when free time meant something completely different. No scrolling, no streaming, no screens in your pocket demanding attention every second. The way Americans filled their hours between work and sleep was radically different from today, built around physical places, face-to-face interaction, and activities that required you to actually do something rather than passively consume. From Friday nights to lazy Sunday afternoons, from summer vacations to winter evenings, the rhythm of leisure time followed patterns that have now almost completely disappeared. Today, we're going to walk through every way Americans spent their free time before the internet changed everything. Let's step back into a world where being bored was normal, where entertainment required effort, and where free time felt genuinely free. Friday night, the week's reward. Stopping at the video rental store. Friday evening after work or school meant one thing for millions of Americans: a trip to the video rental store. This wasn't a quick online browse. This was an expedition, a family outing, a ritual that could take an hour or more as you wandered the aisles, making the most important decision of the week: what are we watching tonight? The store had a smell you'd recognize immediately: plastic cases, carpet that had absorbed years of foot traffic, popcorn from the counter near the counter, and that distinctive scent of VHS tapes. The layout was familiar: new releases along the front wall, often already checked out with just the empty cases remaining on the shelf, comedy in one section, drama in another, horror tucked in the back corner where kids probably shouldn't go but always did, and a separate room behind a curtain for adult content that everyone pretended not to notice. You'd walk the aisles slowly, picking up cases, reading the back, looking at screenshots, trying to decide based on minimal information and a vague memory of having seen a commercial or heard someone mention it. Your family would split up, kids gravitating toward their section, parents toward theirs, and eventually you'd reconvene and negotiate. 2 movies if it was a special weekend, maybe 3 if you were really ambitious, though you'd probably fall asleep during the third one. The checkout process involved the clerk scanning your membership card, a plastic card kept in your wallet next to your driver's license, checking which movies you had, making sure you didn't have late fees that needed to be paid. You'd hand over a few dollars, receive your rentals in a plastic bag, and walk out with your weekend entertainment secured. The movies were due back by a specific time on Sunday or Monday, and if you were late, you'd rack up late fees at $1 or $2 per day. Some people were meticulous about rewinding and returning on time. Others had a casual relationship with due dates and ended up paying more in late fees than the rentals cost. "Be kind, please rewind" signs were everywhere because returning a tape without rewinding it was considered deeply inconsiderate, forcing the next renter to wait or do it themselves. Blockbuster was the giant, the blue and yellow logo a landmark in every suburban strip mall. But there were also Hollywood Video, smaller regional chains, and independent stores with carefully curated selections and staff who actually knew movies and could make recommendations. These stores were social spaces, places where you'd run into neighbors and friends, where clerks knew regular customers, where browsing was entertainment in itself.
Friday night TV lineup. If you weren't renting movies, you were watching what television offered, and Friday night had specific programming designed for families and younger viewers winding down from the week. The networks knew what they were doing, scheduling shows that people could watch together, that didn't require heavy thinking, that provided an easy transition from work week to weekend. TGIF on ABC was the dominant force in the 80s and 90s. Thank God it's Friday. A block of sitcoms starting at 8 o'clock and running until 10. Full House, Family Matters, Step by Step, Boy Meets World. These shows rotated through the lineup over the years, but the concept remained constant: safe, family-friendly comedy that everyone could watch together. The living room would be occupied, parents on the couch, kids on the floor, everyone watching the same screen because there was only one TV or because watching together was just what you did. The shows had laugh tracks, predictable plots, moral lessons delivered in 22 minutes. They weren't challenging or provocative or particularly memorable, but they were comfortable, reliable, a known quantity that you could sink into after a long week. The commercials were part of the experience, ads for toys, cars, fast food, insurance, and you'd watch them too because there was no fast forwarding through commercials on live TV, no skipping ahead, just patient waiting for the show to return. CBS had Dallas and later shows like Touched by an Angel. NBC had their own Friday lineup. Fox, once it launched, targeted younger audiences with edgier content. But regardless of network, Friday night TV meant settling in, maybe ordering pizza or making popcorn, and spending a few hours in front of the television doing nothing else, giving the shows your full attention, or at least having them on in the background while you talked or did other things. The evening news at 6 or 6:30 provided the transition from daytime to evening programming, anchors delivering the day's events in serious tones, weather forecasts, sports scores, and then primetime would begin, a carefully programmed sequence designed to keep you watching one show after another until the local news at 10 or 11 signaled that the evening was ending and it was time to think about bed. Going to the mall. The mall wasn't just a place to shop, it was a destination, a social hub, somewhere you went to see and be seen, to walk around, to kill time, to meet friends. Friday evening, the mall would be packed with teenagers who'd been dropped off by parents or who'd driven themselves, using the mall as a gathering place because there weren't many alternatives. You'd enter through one of the anchor stores, Sears, JCPenney, Macy's, walking through their departments to reach the mall corridor, or you'd come in through one of the main entrances, immediately hit by the conditioned air, the background music playing through overhead speakers, the visual assault of store windows and signage competing for attention. The mall had a specific geography that everyone knew. The food court, usually in the center or at one end, with its cluster of fast food counters, Sparrow, Orange Julius, Chick-fil-A, whatever was regional or national. Tables and chairs where people would eat and socialize. The arcade, if the mall had one, with its row of video game cabinets, pinball machines, the sound of electronic beeps and buzzers and quarters dropping into slots. The record store, Sam Goody, Musicland, Tower Records, where you could browse CDs and cassettes, listen to albums at the listening stations, maybe buy a single or put an album on layaway. The bookstore, Walden Books or B. Dalton, smaller than the big box stores that would come later, but adequate for bestsellers and magazines. Specific stores attracted specific crowds, Hot Topic for the alternative kids, The Gap for the preppy ones, Spencer's Gifts for inappropriate gag gifts and black light posters, Limited 2 for teenage girls, the department stores for more serious shopping or just to walk through and see what was new.
But the real activity was walking the loop, circling the mall over and over, seeing who else was there, running into classmates and friends, sitting on the benches or the edge of the fountain, people watching, flirting, making plans. The mall provided climate-controlled space where teenagers could exist semi-independently, away from parents but in a relatively safe environment, spending money if they had it, window shopping if they didn't. Security guards would patrol, keeping an eye on loiterers and making sure groups of kids weren't being disruptive, occasionally asking people to leave if they weren't shopping and were just taking up space. The mall had rules, a code of conduct that was enforced loosely but existed nonetheless. By 9 or 9:30, the stores would start closing, metal gates rolling down over entrances, lights turning off section by section. The teenagers would drift toward exits, parents arriving to pick up, the Friday night mall experience concluding for another week. Saturday, the best day. Saturday morning yard sales. Weekend mornings, particularly in suburban neighborhoods, meant yard sales and garage sales, people selling accumulated possessions from their driveways, front lawns, and garages.
The sales would be advertised in the Friday or Saturday newspaper classifieds, small text listings giving addresses and hints about what was for sale, or with handmade signs posted at intersections directing traffic to the sale. Serious yard sale hunters would start early, 7 or 8 in the morning, armed with cash and a route planned from newspaper listings, hitting multiple sales in a morning, looking for treasures, bargains, things they didn't know they needed until they saw them for sale at 75 cents. The sales themselves varied wildly in organization and quality. Some people would have everything neatly arranged on tables with prices clearly marked, items grouped by category. Others would just pile stuff in the driveway, boxes of books, old toys, kitchen equipment, clothes on hangers draped over a rope strung between trees, everything jumbled together, no prices, requiring you to ask how much for each item. The sellers would sit in lawn chairs nearby, usually with a cash box full of small bills and change, sometimes drinking coffee, often chatting with neighbors who'd stopped by to see what was for sale. Negotiation was expected. If something was marked $2, you could offer $1 and might get it. Multi-item purchases could be bundled. "I'll give you $5 for all of these," often worked. The inventory was completely random. Old board games, missing pieces, books from decades past, vinyl records, VHS tapes, clothing that was out of style or outgrown, furniture that was worn but functional, tools, kitchenware, decorations, baby items, exercise equipment purchased with good intentions and barely used, the detritus of middle-class American life, priced to move. For buyers, yard sales were treasure hunts. You might find something genuinely valuable or useful. You might find something weird and interesting. You might find nothing at all. But the process of looking, of browsing through other people's cast-offs, of imagining the stories behind the objects was entertainment in itself. For sellers, yard sales were a way to declutter, make a little money, and engage with the community. You'd talk to neighbors you rarely saw otherwise. You'd watch people rifle through your old possessions and decide they wanted them. By noon or 1 o'clock, you'd pack up whatever didn't sell, donate it or save it for the next yard sale, and count your earnings. Maybe $50, maybe $200, feeling productive and lighter without all that stuff.
Working on the car. Saturday afternoon in many American homes meant Dad was in the garage or driveway working on the car. And this wasn't just oil changes. This was maintenance, repairs, modifications, all done at home with basic tools and knowledge passed down or learned through trial and error. Cars in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were simpler than today's computer-controlled vehicles. You could see and access the major components. The engine had visible parts, carburetor, distributor, spark plugs, belts, and hoses, and they could be adjusted or replaced without specialized equipment. Maintenance wasn't about plugging in a diagnostic computer. It was about looking, listening, feeling, understanding how the machine worked. Your father would pop the hood, prop it open with the metal rod, and lean in, assessing whatever needed attention. Maybe it was time for an oil change, a straightforward task involving draining the old oil into a pan, replacing the filter, adding new oil, no appointment at a quick lube place necessary. Maybe the spark plugs needed replacing, pulling them out one at a time, checking the gap on the new ones, screwing them back in. Maybe a belt was squealing and needed tightening or replacement. Maybe the carburetor needed adjusting to improve performance. The garage or driveway was the workspace, tools spread out on a towel or on a rolling tool chest, socket wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers, hammers, specialty tools for specific jobs, an oil pan, a grease gun, WD-40, shop rags, paper towels, maybe a shop manual, a thick book with diagrams and specifications, consulting it when memory wasn't enough. Working on the car was partly necessity. Professional mechanics were expensive, and doing it yourself saved money. But it was also pride, competence, independence. Knowing how to maintain your vehicle was a basic adult skill, expected of men especially, and passing that knowledge to sons was part of growing up. Standing next to Dad, handing him tools, learning the names of parts, understanding cause and effect, mechanical relationships, problem solving. The work was physical, sometimes frustrating. Bolts were stuck and wouldn't budge, parts didn't fit quite right, oil spilled, knuckles got scraped on sharp edges, but there was satisfaction in fixing something yourself, in starting the car after a repair and hearing it run smoothly, knowing you'd done that, you'd made it work. Neighbors would wander over, offer advice or help, borrow tools, talk about their own car problems. The driveway became a social space, men standing around an open hood discussing compression ratios or transmission issues, sharing knowledge and experience. By late afternoon, the work would be done, tools cleaned and put away, the car running better, and your father would wash his hands with that gritty orange soap that smelled like citrus and chemicals, satisfied with a job completed, ready for whatever the rest of the weekend held. Watching sports all afternoon. Saturday and Sunday afternoons were for sports, and if you were a sports fan, the TV was yours for hours. The programming carefully scheduled to provide continuous coverage from noon until early evening. College football dominated fall Saturdays, games starting at noon Eastern Time and running in overlapping blocks through the day. You'd watch your team, your conference, whatever game was on the available channels, ABC, CBS, NBC, rotating coverage, regional broadcasts showing local teams. The announcers became familiar voices, their catchphrases and styles part of the experience. The marching bands, the cheerleaders, the stadium atmospheres, all mediated through the television, but vivid enough to feel present. Baseball filled summer weekends, the game of the week broadcast nationally, local teams on regional stations. Baseball's pace suited weekend afternoons, slow, methodical, allowing you to do other things while listening, only paying full attention during key moments. Your father might doze in his recliner, the game playing, waking up to check the score, drifting off again. Basketball, hockey, golf, bowling, auto racing, whatever was in season found its slot, and dedicated fans would watch, but more casual viewers would have it on in the background, a presence in the room rather than the focus of attention. The commercials were specifically targeted: beer, cars, tools, insurance, products marketed to men because sports viewership skewed male. The beer commercials especially were memorable, mini narratives building brand loyalty, catchphrases that became part of the culture.
Watching sports was a communal experience, even when you were alone. You knew millions of others were watching the same game, experiencing the same moments, and Monday morning at work or school, you'd discuss it, analyze it, argue about calls and plays and outcomes. Sports provided shared cultural touchstones, topics of conversation, ways to bond with strangers who rooted for the same team. The experience was passive but engaged. You weren't doing anything productive, weren't accomplishing anything tangible, but you were participating in something larger, part of a viewership, a fan base, a tradition that stretched back decades and would continue into the future. Sunday, the day of rest. Reading the Sunday newspaper. Sunday morning meant the newspaper, and not the slim weekday edition, but the massive Sunday paper, thick enough to serve as a booster seat, wrapped in plastic or rubber banded together, delivered to your driveway before dawn. Your father would retrieve it, bring it inside, and the unwrapping would begin, separating the sections, spreading them across the living room floor or the kitchen table, dividing them up so multiple family members could read simultaneously. The sections had their hierarchy and their audience. The front section, with hard news, went to whoever was most interested in current events. The sports section went to the sports fan. The comics went to the kids. The style or living section went to your mother. The classifieds, the real estate listings, the automotive section, the business pages, all separated and distributed.
The Sunday paper was substantial, might contain several hundred pages, including inserts and advertisements. Reading it wasn't a quick skim. It was a commitment, an activity that could occupy an hour or more, leisurely consumed with coffee, sprawled on the couch or at the table, the house quiet except for the rustling of newsprint. The comics were in color on Sundays, a step up from the black and white weekday strips. Multi-panel Sunday strips from artists like Charles Schulz, Mort Walker, Beetle Bailey, Jim Davis, Garfield, Gary Larson, The Far Side. These were cultural institutions, strips you'd been reading for years, characters and situations so familiar they felt like friends. Dear Abby or Ann Landers provided advice and morality tales, letters from readers seeking guidance on relationships, etiquette, family conflicts. The horoscopes, the crossword puzzle, the jumble, these were regular features, rituals, things you do every Sunday without thinking. The TV listings, if you didn't get TV guides separately, showed the entire week's programming, useful for planning recording on your VCR or just knowing what was coming. The advertising inserts were their own category, glossy circulars from grocery stores, department stores, electronics retailers, showing sales and special offers. Your mother might clip coupons, circle items of interest, plan shopping trips based on the deals advertised. The newspaper was physical, tactile, left ink on your fingers, had to be disposed of, recycled if your area had pickup, or saved for other uses, or just thrown out. But while it lasted, it was the primary source of information, the way you learned what was happening locally and nationally, the mediated world delivered to your doorstep every morning, most substantially on Sundays.
Sunday dinner after church. For many American families, Sunday meant church in the morning, followed by a large family meal in the early afternoon, a structured routine that organized the day and reinforced family bonds and community connections. Church services varied by denomination, but generally consumed the late morning, arriving by 10 or 10:30, service lasting an hour to 90 minutes, socializing afterward in the parking lot or church hall, the whole experience taking 2 to 3 hours. Everyone dressed up, suits for men and boys, dresses for women and girls, the good clothes that were uncomfortable but appropriate, required, expected. After church came the meal, and this wasn't a quick lunch. This was dinner, the main meal of the day, prepared with care and served formally. Your mother might have started preparations before church, putting a roast in the oven on low heat so it would cook while the family was away. Or she'd begin cooking when you got home, spending an hour or more at the stove. The menu was traditional, classic American fare, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, fried chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy, ham with green beans and corn, maybe meatloaf, maybe pork chops. Sides were vegetables, canned or frozen, cooked until soft, and bread, rolls or biscuits, butter. Salad if your family did salad, though many didn't. Dessert was pie or cake, something homemade or bakery bought, served after the meal with coffee. The table was set properly, tablecloth, real plates, not paper, silverware arranged correctly, glasses filled with milk or iced tea or water. The family gathered, sat in their usual spots, and ate together, passing dishes, serving yourselves, talking about the sermon or the week ahead or whatever came up. Sunday dinner was where extended family might appear, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, expanding the table, making the meal an event. The house would be full of conversation and activity, kids playing after eating while adults lingered over coffee, the afternoon stretching long and lazy. The cleanup was substantial. Dishes, pots, pans, all washed by hand or loaded into the dishwasher, leftovers wrapped and stored for later meals. But the effort was worth it, part of the rhythm of Sunday, the weekly pause, the day different from all others. Sunday evening preparation for Monday. As Sunday evening approached, the mood shifted. The weekend was ending, work and school loomed, and there were things that needed to be done to prepare, tasks that had been put off but could be delayed no longer.
Homework, if you were a student, had to be finished. That book report due Monday, those math problems, that science worksheet, whatever you'd ignored Friday and Saturday now demanded attention. You'd spread your books across the kitchen table or your bedroom desk, working with one eye on the clock, trying to finish before bedtime, sometimes succeeding, sometimes staying up late, sometimes not finishing at all and hoping the teacher wouldn't notice or would give you an extension. Laundry might need doing, uniforms for school or work, clothes for the week ahead. Your mother might do a load or two, the washer and dryer running, clothes folded and distributed to bedrooms. Lunches might be packed for Monday, sandwiches made, snacks bagged, everything ready to grab in the morning rush. The Sunday night TV lineup provided background. 60 Minutes, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Disney, whatever was scheduled, shows the family could watch together while doing these evening tasks, the television a companion rather than the focus. Baths or showers, getting clean for the week ahead, setting out clothes for tomorrow. Winding down, getting ready for bed earlier than Friday or Saturday because tomorrow was a work day, a school day, the weekend officially over. There was a melancholy to Sunday evening, a sense of time slipping away, the brief freedom of the weekend consumed, the routine of work and responsibility resuming. But there was also acceptance, the knowledge that this was the rhythm of life, the cycle that would repeat next week and the week after, the structure that gave meaning to leisure time by contrasting it with obligation.
Hobbies and crafts. Model building. In spare hours, particularly for boys and men, model building was a common hobby. Assembling plastic scale models of cars, planes, ships, military vehicles from kits purchased at hobby shops or toy stores. The kits came in boxes with dramatic cover art showing the finished product. Inside were plastic parts on sprues, frames holding dozens of pieces that needed to be carefully cut out and assembled according to instruction sheets with exploded diagrams showing how everything fit together. You'd set up a workspace, the kitchen table covered with newspaper, or a desk in your room, and lay out the parts, the instruction sheet, the tools you'd need, hobby knife for cutting pieces from sprues, sandpaper for smoothing rough edges, plastic cement in tubes with the distinctive sharp chemical smell, tiny paintbrushes if you were painting the model. Assembly required patience and precision. Parts were small, delicate, easily broken. The instructions were sometimes unclear, diagrams ambiguous, requiring you to puzzle out how pieces connected. Glue had to be applied sparingly or it would squeeze out and mar the surface. Parts had to be held together while glue dried, requiring stillness and time. The process could take hours or days depending on complexity. A simple car might be done in an evening, an elaborate ship might take weeks of intermittent work. As you worked, the model would gradually take shape, becoming recognizable, the transformation from bag of plastic pieces to coherent object satisfying in a deep way. Painting was optional, but made the difference between a toy-like appearance and something realistic. You'd use model paints, testers or Pactra in small glass bottles or jars, mixing colors, applying thin coats, waiting for drying, adding details, panel lines, weathering, insignias. The painting took skill and steadiness, a careful hand, and the results varied wildly depending on ability and effort. The finished models would be displayed on shelves in your bedroom, on the mantel, in a cabinet, evidence of your hobby, your patience, your craft. They were fragile, gathered dust, sometimes broke, but while intact they were small achievements, proof that you could create something, could follow instructions, could produce a tangible result from focused effort. Photography as a real hobby. Before digital cameras made photography instant and free, taking pictures was a hobby that required investment, knowledge, and patience. Serious photographers owned 35mm cameras, Nikon, Canon, Pentax, with interchangeable lenses and manual controls, equipment that cost real money and demanded learning to use properly. Photography meant understanding aperture, shutter speed, ISO, the relationship between these variables, and how they affected exposure and depth of field and motion blur. It meant composing shots carefully because film was limited and expensive. 36 exposures per roll, each shot costing money to develop, so you didn't waste frames on casual snapshots. You'd load film into the camera, a process that required dexterity and care, threading the film leader onto the take-up spool, closing the back, advancing the film until the counter showed you were on frame 1. The film itself came in different speeds, 100 for bright light and fine grain, 400 for low light and more flexibility, specialty films for black and white or slide transparencies. Taking photos meant thinking about light, about composition, about what you wanted to capture and how. You'd adjust settings based on conditions, maybe use a light meter to ensure proper exposure, maybe bracket shots, taking the same photo at different settings to ensure at least one came out right. After shooting a roll, you'd rewind it carefully, remove it from the camera, take it to a photo lab or drugstore for developing. Then you'd wait, days, a week, and when the prints came back, you'd see what you got, discover which shots worked and which didn't, learn from mistakes.
Photographers might develop their own film at home, setting up dark rooms in bathrooms or closets, using chemical baths and enlargers to print photos from negatives, controlling the entire process from exposure to final print. This required investment in equipment and chemistry, required learning a craft, but produced results that were uniquely yours, images that existed because you'd created them through technical skill and artistic vision. Photography clubs existed where enthusiasts would meet, share work, critique each other, go on photo walks or trips together, pursuing their hobby in community with others who understood and appreciated it. Do you remember these activities? Does this feel familiar? Leave a comment sharing what you did with your free time. We're halfway through this journey. Summer activities. Swimming at the public pool. Summer meant the public pool, a community facility where kids and families would spend entire days during the hottest months, the chlorinated water a refuge from the heat, the pool deck a social space where neighborhood dynamics played out. The pool had its geography and its rules, the shallow end for young kids and non-swimmers, gradually deepening until you reached the diving area, where depth markers on the side showed 8 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet. Diving boards at the deep end, a low board for everyone, a high dive for the brave or foolish, the platform 3 meters up that only the most confident would attempt. You'd arrive mid-morning, having packed a bag with your towel, sunscreen, maybe some snacks and money for the concession stand. The entrance had a window where you'd pay 50 cents or $1 for kids, maybe more for adults, or show your season pass if your family had bought one. Then through the gate to the locker rooms, changing into your swimsuit if you hadn't already, storing your clothes in a locker, the smell of chlorine and mildew overwhelming. The pool deck was concrete, hot under bare feet in the midday sun, the water offering immediate relief. You'd jump in, the shock of cold despite the summer heat, the taste of chlorine in your mouth, your eyes stinging slightly. You'd swim, play games, Marco Polo, chicken fights, races, or just float, enjoying the weightlessness. The lifeguards sat in elevated chairs, sunglasses on, whistles around necks, watching for rule violations. No running on the deck, they'd blow the whistle and shout at you. No diving in the shallow end, no rough play. Every hour, adult swim. 15 minutes where kids had to get out and only adults could be in the water, giving the lifeguards a break and the pool a chance to settle. The concession stand sold candy, chips, soda, ice cream, hot dogs, French fries, food you'd eat dripping wet, sitting on the edge of the pool or at a picnic table, tasting like chlorine because everything tasted like chlorine after a few hours.
You'd stay all day, skin pruning, hair turning green from the chemicals, getting sunburned despite sunscreen, exhausted from swimming and sun. The pool would close at 6 or 7, everyone clearing out, the parking lot emptying, and you'd go home tired and hungry and already planning to return tomorrow. Little League and organized sports. Summer evenings meant youth sports, and for millions of American kids, that meant Little League baseball. Teams sponsored by local businesses, games played at community fields, parents in attendance, a structured activity that organized the summer. You'd practice twice a week, learning fundamentals, how to field ground balls, how to throw properly, how to bat, how to run bases. The coach was usually a volunteer parent, someone who'd played baseball as a kid and wanted to pass it on, teaching with varying degrees of competence and patience. Games were on weekends or weekday evenings, scheduled in a league with other teams from nearby communities. You'd wear a uniform, team colors, a number, your name, or just the number on the back, and you'd feel official, professional, part of something real. The games themselves were exercises in learning how to play, how to follow rules, how to handle success and failure in front of an audience. Most kids sat on the bench more than they played. There were only 9 positions and usually 12 or 15 kids on a team, so playing time was rationed, everyone getting a turn, but star players getting more. Parents sat in bleachers or lawn chairs along the baseline, cheering their kids, sometimes too enthusiastically, sometimes critically, coaching from the sidelines even though they weren't supposed to. The dynamic between parents, coaches, kids, umpires could get tense, emotions running high over what was ultimately children playing a game. After the game, win or lose, there might be a trip to the ice cream shop or fast food place, the team celebrating or consoling themselves, bonds forming between kids who'd spend the summer together, relationships that might last a season or years. Little League taught baseball, but also taught showing up, following through, being part of a team, handling authority, dealing with disappointment. The lessons weren't always pleasant, but they were real, and the structure provided something for kids to do, a positive outlet, an alternative to unstructured time that could lead to trouble. Family road trips. Summer meant vacation. And for many families, vacation meant loading up the car and driving somewhere, a national park, a beach, a relative's house in another state, a tourist destination hundreds of miles away. The preparation was substantial. Maps spread out on the dining table, routes planned, stops calculated, reservations made for hotels or campgrounds. The car serviced, oil changed, tires checked, fluid levels topped off, because a breakdown far from home was a disaster to be avoided. Packing the car was its own challenge. Suitcases in the trunk, a cooler with drinks and snacks wedged into the footwell, pillows and blankets for kids to sleep on during long hours on the road. Dad would pack methodically, Tetrising everything into the available space. Mom would double-check that nothing essential was forgotten, and kids would be impatient to just get going already. The drive itself was the experience. Hours in the car, scenery changing gradually, the landscape shifting from familiar to foreign. No GPS, no real-time traffic updates, just the map and road signs, and occasionally stopping to ask for directions when you got lost, which you inevitably would at some point. The interstates made long-distance travel faster but more monotonous, mile after mile of highway, rest stops every 50 or 100 miles offering bathrooms and vending machines and sprawling parking lots. The back roads were slower but more interesting. Small towns with diners and gas stations, roadside attractions that promised wonder and usually delivered kitsch. Kids in the back seat played games to pass time, license plate bingo, spotting different state plates and checking them off, I Spy, 20 Questions, fighting with siblings over space and territory, the invisible line down the middle of the back seat that neither was supposed to cross, asking, "Are we there yet?" until your father snapped at you to stop asking. Lunch was at a roadside diner or fast food place, stretching legs, using bathrooms, refueling both the car and the family. Dinner might be at the hotel or motel restaurant or takeout brought back to the room. Accommodations were budget motels with 2 double beds and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, TVs bolted to dressers, swimming pools that might or might not be clean, ice machines down the hall. The destination, when you finally reached it after hours or days of driving, was almost anticlimactic. But the journey itself, the time confined together in the car, the shared experience of traveling, created memories that outlasted whatever you did once you arrived.
Evening entertainment, board games and cards. Evenings at home, particularly in winter when going outside wasn't appealing, families and friends would gather around tables to play board games and card games, analog entertainment that required focus, strategy, social interaction. Monopoly was the classic, the game that could last hours, that could destroy friendships and family harmony, that taught capitalism and ruthlessness and the fact that luck mattered as much as strategy. You'd set up the board, distribute the money, choose your token, the top hat, the race car, the dog, the thimble, and begin circling, buying properties, building houses and hotels, bankrupting opponents, arguments erupting over rules and rent and whether landing on free parking gave you the money from the center of the board or not. Risk was for the more ambitious, global conquest requiring strategy and dice rolls, alliances forming and breaking, hours invested in moving tiny plastic armies across a map of the world, the game ending when one player dominated or everyone got too tired to continue. Scrabble rewarded vocabulary and spatial thinking, letter tiles arranged on a board, words intersecting, points accumulating, arguments over whether a word was valid requiring consulting the dictionary that came with the game. Trivial Pursuit tested knowledge across categories: geography, entertainment, history, arts and literature, science and nature, sports and leisure, moving around the board collecting pie pieces. The questions sometimes impossible, sometimes absurdly easy, the game dragging on until someone finally collected all 6 pieces and answered the final question correctly. Card games required only a deck, 52 cards, endlessly versatile. Poker for adults, betting with chips or pennies or just playing for pride. Rummy, gym rummy, canasta for more casual play. Hearts, spades, euchre, regional favorites with rules that varied by family and location. Kids played Go Fish, War, Crazy Eights, simple games that taught numbers and strategy. Game night was social, conversational, competitive. You'd trash talk, form alliances, celebrate victories, complain about bad luck. Hours would pass without television, without screens, just people around a table, engaged with each other, with the game, with the moment. Calling friends on the phone. Without texting or instant messaging or social media, if you wanted to communicate with friends when you weren't together, you called them on the phone. And this wasn't a quick text conversation. This was extended talking, sometimes for hours, occupying the family phone line, creating conflict when others needed to make calls. You'd dial their number from memory or from a list of numbers written in a notebook or on a sheet of paper taped to the wall near the phone. The phone would ring at their end, and they'd answer, and you'd talk about nothing, about everything, about what happened at school, about plans for the weekend, about gossip and relationships and problems and jokes, and whatever came to mind.
The conversations meandered, had no agenda, no time limit except when parents would eventually insist you hang up because you'd been on the phone for an hour and someone else needed to use it. You'd sit on the floor in the hallway or kitchen, the coiled phone cord stretched to its limit, giving you as much privacy as possible while still being tethered to the wall-mounted phone.
Three-way calling, when it became available, allowed you to call one friend, then add another to the conversation, creating conference calls before conference calls were a business thing. You'd talk over each other, laugh, sometimes prank call people and hang up when they answered. Juvenile entertainment that felt hilarious at the time. The phone was the primary means of staying connected between in-person interactions. You'd call to make plans. Want to come over tomorrow? Can you come to the mall with me? But you'd also call just to talk, just to hear another voice, just to maintain the relationship. Busy signals meant the person you were calling was already on the phone with someone else, and you'd have to wait and try again later. No text message to send, no voicemail to leave, just the knowledge that they were unavailable and you'd connect when you connected. Long-distance calls were expensive, charged by the minute, so calling relatives or friends in other states was a special occasion, brief, getting to the point quickly, saving the extended conversations for when rates were lower on weekends or evenings. The phone was essential technology, the communication lifeline, and controlling it, having access to it, being allowed to use it freely, was a form of power and privilege that kids negotiated with parents constantly. The end of the analog era. As the 1990s ended and the 2000s began, everything we've described started changing rapidly. The internet became mainstream, shifted from dial-up to broadband, became always on rather than something you connected to when needed. Cell phones evolved from luxury items to necessities, from devices for making calls to smartphones that could do everything. Video rental stores closed, unable to compete with Netflix and streaming. Malls emptied as online shopping grew. Board game nights became less common as screens provided easier entertainment. Phone calls became texts and messages, brief and transactional rather than extended conversations. The way Americans spent their free time before the internet wasn't necessarily better, but it was different, fundamentally different. And understanding that difference helps us understand ourselves, our culture, what we've gained, and what we've lost in the transition to the digital age. For those who lived through it, these memories are vivid, powerful, formative. Friday nights at Blockbuster, Saturday mornings at yard sales, Sunday dinners after church, summer days at the pool, family road trips, board game nights, phone conversations that lasted for hours. These weren't just activities, they were the substance of life, the way time was filled, the experiences that created bonds and memories. And now they're mostly gone, preserved in memory, in stories, in moments like this when we pause and look back and remember what it was like when free time meant something entirely different, when being bored was normal, when entertainment required effort, when the internet didn't exist and life was lived in physical space, in real time, with other people, in ways that will never be repeated but will never be forgotten by those who were there. Thank you for joining us on this journey through American leisure time before the digital revolution. If these memories resonated with you, share this with someone who remembers. Leave a comment with your favorite way of spending free time, and subscribe for more explorations of how Americans used to live. The analog era is over, but it's not forgotten. Not by us, not by you. Homework at the kitchen table. Weeknights after dinner, the kitchen table became the workspace, the place where homework happened under parental supervision, or at least parental proximity. You'd clear away the dishes, wipe down the surface, and spread out your books and notebooks, settling in for an hour or two of work that had to be completed before tomorrow's classes. The setup was simple but functional. Textbooks open to the assigned pages, notebook paper for writing out answers, pencils and pens from your pencil case, maybe a calculator if the math was beyond what you could do in your head.
Your mother might be nearby doing dishes or preparing tomorrow's lunches, available to help if you got stuck, occasionally glancing over to make sure you were actually working and not just daydreaming. The assignments varied by subject and grade level, but followed familiar patterns. Math problems, rows of equations to solve, showing your work, checking answers in the back of the book if the textbook provided them. Reading assignments, chapters from novels or textbooks, answering comprehension questions, writing short essays, analyzing themes or historical events. Science worksheets, vocabulary lists, geography maps to label, whatever your teachers had assigned that day. Some assignments were straightforward and could be completed in 20 minutes. Others were more complex, requiring research, looking things up in the encyclopedia set on the bookshelf, reading and taking notes, synthesizing information into your own words. Book reports meant reading entire books over several nights, then writing summaries and analyses on ruled paper, trying to make your handwriting neat and legible because you'd be turning this in and it would be graded partly on presentation. The kitchen table was a neutral space, not as isolated as doing homework in your room, but not as distracting as trying to work in the living room with the TV on. Your siblings might be doing their own homework at the same table, and there might be occasional conflicts, borrowing pencils without asking, one person taking up too much space, accusations of copying, but generally it worked, the shared space creating a sense that homework was a collective family obligation, everyone doing their part. Your parents' involvement varied. Some parents were hands-on, checking every answer, helping with difficult problems, essentially doing the homework with you. Others were more hands-off, expecting you to manage it yourself, only intervening if you specifically asked for help. Most fell somewhere in between, available if needed, checking that you'd completed the work, signing permission slips and review sheets that needed parental signatures. When homework was finished, you'd pack everything back into your backpack or school bag, making sure nothing was forgotten, and the rest of the evening was yours. TV time, reading for pleasure, playing with toys or games, whatever unwinding you could fit in before bedtime. But the homework had to be done first. That was the rule, the structure, the non-negotiable part of weeknight evenings that organized your time and taught responsibility, time management, and the understanding that obligations came before entertainment. The evening news ritual. At 6 or 6:30 every weeknight, the television would be tuned to the evening news, and for that half hour or hour, the family would be exposed to the day's events, filtered through the perspectives of network anchors whose faces and voices became as familiar as relatives. Walter Cronkite on CBS saying, "And that's the way it is," at the end of each broadcast. Tom Brokaw on NBC, Peter Jennings on ABC, Dan Rather taking over from Cronkite. These men, and they were almost all men, were trusted figures, their authority accepted, their presentations of events rarely questioned because there weren't alternative sources readily available to challenge or verify their reporting.
The news followed a predictable structure. The top stories first, international conflicts, political developments, economic news, major disasters or events that affected the nation. Then national news, stories from around the country that warranted coverage. Local news, if this was a local station, or a brief national weather forecast and sports roundup if it was network. The whole package designed to inform the viewing public about what mattered, what they needed to know to be engaged citizens. Watching the news was civic duty, adult responsibility, staying informed about the world. Your father paid attention, sometimes commenting on stories, expressing opinions, explaining context to you if something seemed important or confusing. Your mother might be half listening while doing other things, but the TV was on, the news was playing, and even if you weren't actively watching, you absorbed it, learned what was happening, formed impressions of the world beyond your immediate experience. The commercials during the news were targeted to an older demographic: pharmaceuticals, insurance, investment services, cars, products for homeowners, and people planning for retirement. The advertising assumed a certain economic status and stage of life, targeting the middle-class viewers who had disposable income and responsibilities. After the national news ended, the local news would begin. Coverage of your city or region, stories that might directly affect you, local politics, crime reports, human interest stories, high school sports scores, weather forecasts that actually mattered because they told you what tomorrow would be like. The local anchors were personalities, people you'd see at community events, whose children might go to your school, who were part of the fabric of local life. The news provided a shared experience, a common set of facts and stories that everyone was exposed to simultaneously. The next day at work or school, people would reference what they'd seen on the news, discuss it, debate it, use it as conversational currency. The news created informed citizenry, at least theoretically, giving people the information they needed to participate in democracy, to vote, to form opinions, to feel connected to events beyond their personal lives. Primetime television as family time. After the news came primetime, the hours from 8 to 11 when the networks aired their most popular shows, the programming that drew the largest audiences, that generated advertising revenue, that became cultural touchstones. The shows varied by era and network, but followed certain patterns. Sitcoms for lighter entertainment, family-friendly comedy, workplace comedy, shows built around likable characters in predictable situations, laugh tracks cueing when something was supposed to be funny. The Cosby Show, Cheers, Family Ties, Golden Girls, Roseanne, these shows attracted millions of viewers weekly, created catchphrases, influenced fashion and attitudes, became part of the national conversation. Dramas for more serious storytelling, police procedurals, medical shows, legal dramas, continuing storylines that required watching every week to follow the narrative. Hill Street Blues, LA Law, St. Elsewhere, later ER and Law and Order, these shows tackled social issues, created complex characters, pushed boundaries of what television could address. The network scheduled carefully, trying to capture and hold audiences throughout the evening, leading from one show to the next, preventing channel changing by creating a flow that rewarded loyalty. If you watched NBC on Thursday night, you might start with The Cosby Show at 8, flow into Family Ties at 8:30, then Cheers at 9, and Night Court at 9:30. A whole evening of comedy without leaving the channel. Families would gather for these shows, making decisions about what to watch, sometimes negotiating or compromising when preferences conflicted. The remote control, if you had one, gave power to whoever held it, usually your father, who controlled the channel selection and volume. Without a remote, someone, usually a kid, would be designated as the channel changer, getting up to turn the dial whenever a decision was made to watch something different. The shows were appointment television. You had to be home at the right time, had to be in front of the TV when the show started, because missing it meant missing it entirely until summer reruns months later. This created urgency, priority, a structuring of time around television schedules. You'd rush home from activities to catch a show, you'd plan your evening around what was on TV, you'd defend your show choices, because limited channels meant choosing one thing, meant not watching another. The commercial breaks were part of the experience, lasting several minutes, providing time to get snacks, use the bathroom, discuss what was happening in the show. The commercials themselves were memorable, jingles and slogans that became part of popular culture, ads that everyone had seen and could reference, shared media experiences that connected the viewing audience. Television watching was passive but social, a shared activity that brought families together, even if they weren't actively interacting, just occupying the same space, watching the same content, experiencing the same stories. It was the default evening activity, what you did after dinner and homework and before bed. The hours filled with whatever the networks provided, consuming content that was designed for mass appeal, that didn't challenge too much, that provided escape and entertainment and a few hours of not having to think about your own life. The weekend project, making things, woodworking in the garage. For men with the inclination and tools, weekend projects often meant woodworking, building something functional or decorative from lumber, using skills passed down from fathers or learned through experience, creating objects that would last, that had the permanence and satisfaction of physical craftsmanship. The garage became the workshop, tools mounted on pegboards or stored in rolling cabinets, the workbench cleared for the current project. The smell of sawdust and wood stain, the sound of the table saw screaming through lumber, the physical labor of measuring, cutting, sanding, assembling, and finishing. Projects varied in complexity and ambition. A simple bookshelf, boards cut to length, assembled with screws or nails, finished with stain or paint, functional and straightforward. A birdhouse for the backyard, a project you might do with your kids, teaching them to measure and hammer, creating something together. More complex projects for the experienced, cabinets, furniture, outdoor decks, additions to the house, work that required planning and skill and time spread across multiple weekends. The process was methodical. Planning first, sketching the design, measuring the space, calculating materials needed, making a list for the lumberyard, shopping for materials, selecting boards, checking them for warps and knots, loading them into the station wagon or truck, buying screws, sandpaper, stain, whatever else the project required. Then the work itself. Measuring carefully, measure twice, cut once, the old carpenter's adage, because mistakes in cutting couldn't be undone, wasted materials and time. Cutting pieces to size using hand saws or power saws, safety glasses on, concentrating on keeping cuts straight and true, sanding everything smooth, progressing from coarse to fine grit, the repetitive motion meditative, the wood getting smoother with each pass. Assembly required patience and sometimes help, holding pieces in position while drilling pilot holes, driving screws, making sure everything was square and level, checking with the spirit level and carpenter square, adjusting until it was right. The satisfaction when pieces fit together properly, when the structure began to take shape, when you could see that yes, this was going to work, this was going to be what you'd envisioned. Finishing was the final step, staining or painting, applying multiple coats, waiting for drying between coats, the chemical smells strong in the garage, ventilation fans running or garage door open for airflow, polyurethane or varnish for protection, making the wood shine, bringing out the grain, sealing it against moisture and wear. The completed project was an achievement, something you'd made yourself, functional and permanent, something you could point to and say, I built that. It might not be perfect, there might be small mistakes, things you'd do differently next time, but it was yours, created through your effort and skill, and it would last, would serve its purpose for years, maybe decades, outlasting trends and fads, a testament to the value of making things with your hands. Sewing and crafts. For women, and some men, weekend projects often meant sewing, knitting, crocheting, needlework, crafts that created functional items or decorative pieces, hobbies that combined creativity with practical purpose. The sewing machine was essential equipment, a heavy mechanical device sitting on a table or in its own cabinet, electric motor driving the needle up and down, fabric feeding through under the presser foot, stitches forming in steady lines. You'd buy fabric from the fabric store, bolts of material in countless patterns and colors, cutting the yardage you needed, also picking up thread, zippers, buttons, whatever notions the project required. Patterns came in paper envelopes, tissue-thin pieces with printed lines and markings, pinned to fabric and used as guides for cutting. Following a pattern required understanding the symbols and instructions, transferring markings, cutting carefully, sewing in the correct sequence, a dress, a shirt, curtains, a quilt, projects that transformed flat fabric into three-dimensional functional items through careful construction. The sewing itself required skill and concentration, feeding fabric evenly through the machine, keeping seams straight, backstitch at the beginning and end, changing thread colors when needed, managing thick seams in corners, inserting zippers and buttonholes. Mistakes happened. Stitches sewn in wrong places had to be picked out with a seam ripper. Fabric cut incorrectly was wasted, but you learned from errors, got better with practice. Knitting and crocheting used yarn and needles or hooks, creating fabric from interlocking loops, working row by row or round by round, following patterns that specified stitches and gauge. Sweaters, afghans, scarves, baby blankets, items that took weeks or months to complete, hours of repetitive motion, watching TV or listening to music while your hands worked automatically, the project growing slowly, steadily. The finished items were worn or used or given as gifts. Handmade clothing, handmade quilts, decorative pillows, things that carried personal investment, that showed care and effort, that couldn't be bought in stores because they were unique, one of a kind, created specifically for their intended purpose or recipient. Craft stores supported these hobbies. Fabric stores, yarn shops, craft chains like Michael's and Joann Fabrics, places where you could browse materials and supplies, get inspiration from displays and samples, attend classes or workshops learning new techniques. The stores were social spaces too, places where crafters would encounter others with similar interests, exchange tips and patterns, share enthusiasm for their hobbies. Crafting was productive leisure, time spent making things rather than consuming things, creating rather than passively receiving. The hobbies required skill that improved with practice, required patience and attention, produced tangible results that justified the time invested, and they connected practitioners to traditions of making, sewing skills passed from mothers to daughters, knitting patterns shared between friends, crafts that had been practiced for generations, that represented continuity and heritage, that valued the handmade in an increasingly mass-produced world. Social gatherings and celebrations. The backyard barbecue. Summer weekends meant barbecues, informal gatherings in backyards where food was cooked on grills, where neighbors and friends and family would congregate, where warm weather and outdoor space created the conditions for casual socializing. The grill was the centerpiece, usually a kettle-style charcoal grill, black metal spheres sitting on 3 legs, or a rectangular charcoal grill with a hinged lid. Charcoal briquettes would be piled in the bottom, doused with lighter fluid, set ablaze, and allowed to burn until they were covered with white ash and radiated steady heat. The smell of charcoal smoke would drift through the neighborhood, announcing that someone was grilling, that a gathering was happening. Your father would stand over the grill with his spatula and tongs, managing the cooking. Hamburgers, hot dogs, steaks, chicken pieces, turning them at the right time, checking for doneness, making sure nothing burned. This was his domain, his responsibility, and he took it seriously, the master of the grill, receiving praise when the meat came out perfectly, defending his techniques when someone suggested he was cooking it wrong. The food was simple, classic American cookout fare. Burgers and buns with standard toppings, lettuce, tomato, onion, pickle, ketchup, and mustard. Hot dogs and buns with relish and mustard. Corn on the cob, maybe grilled directly on the coals in husks, or boiled in a big pot on the stove inside. Potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, chips, sides that were prepared in advance and set out on the picnic table or on a folding table in the yard. Drinks were in a cooler filled with ice, cans of beer for the adults, soda for the kids, maybe a pitcher of iced tea or lemonade. People would help themselves, grabbing drinks as needed, ice melting throughout the afternoon, water accumulating in the bottom of the cooler. The gathering was multi-generational and social. Adults would cluster in conversation groups, discussing work, politics, sports, neighborhood gossip, catching up with people they saw regularly but rarely had extended time to talk with. Kids would play, running around the yard, games of tag or hide and seek, playing with whatever toys or sports equipment was available, largely unsupervised, expected to entertain themselves while the adults socialized. The backyard itself was the venue. Grass that might need mowing, maybe a patio or deck, lawn chairs and folding chairs arranged in clusters, shade from trees or a patio umbrella, the fence marking the boundary of the private space. The setting was casual, comfortable, unpretentious. No one was trying to impress. This was neighborhood socializing, maintaining relationships, building community through shared food and time. As evening approached, the gathering might stretch longer, conversation continuing, perhaps a second round of grilling if people were still hungry, the light fading, mosquitoes emerging, and citronella candles being lit to keep them away. Eventually, people would drift toward leaving, gathering their kids, saying goodbye, thanking the hosts, the party winding down naturally without any formal end. The barbecue represented a particular kind of American socializing, informal, outdoor, centered around food prepared simply and shared communally, creating connections through proximity and conversation, building the social fabric that held neighborhoods together. After dinner, the cleanup was a production. Dishes, pots, pans, leftovers to wrap and distribute, everyone pitching in or the women handling it while the men watched football in the living room. Traditional gender roles reinforced through holiday routine. Then desserts. Pumpkin pie, apple pie, maybe pecan pie, served with coffee, people eating despite being already full because it was tradition, because the pies were there. The rest of the day would be spent digesting, watching TV, playing games, conversation gradually winding down, people getting tired, kids getting cranky, the energy that had built toward the meal now dissipating. Goodbyes would be extended. We should get together more often, knowing you wouldn't. Hugs and promises to call, thank yous to the hosts, the drive home in darkness, you in the back seat feeling full and tired and content. Christmas gatherings followed similar patterns, but with gift exchanges adding another layer. Easter, 4th of July, other holidays had their own traditions, but the structure was similar. Family gathering, big meal, time spent together reinforcing bonds and maintaining relationships, even when those relationships were sometimes strained or superficial. These gatherings were obligation and pleasure mixed together, something you did because it was expected, because family mattered, because these rituals connected you to something larger than yourself, even when individual family members were difficult or boring or asked intrusive questions. You showed up, you participated, you ate too much, you left with leftovers, and you did it again next year because that's what families did. Personal maintenance and self-care. Getting a haircut at the local barbershop. For men and boys, getting a haircut meant going to the barbershop, a small local business usually run by one or two barbers who'd been cutting hair in the same location for years, who knew their regular customers, who provided not just grooming but social interaction. The barbershop had a specific aesthetic. The striped pole outside, red and white spiraling endlessly, the universal symbol. Inside, a few chairs along the wall for waiting customers, magazines on a small table, Sports Illustrated, Field and Stream, maybe Popular Mechanics, reading material targeted to men. The cutting chairs themselves, leather or vinyl, positioned in front of large mirrors, hydraulic lifts to raise and lower the height, footrests that folded out. You'd enter and sign in or just sit down if there was a wait, watching the barber work on the current customer, the rhythm of cutting visible and audible, scissors snipping, electric clippers buzzing, conversation flowing between barber and customer. The barbershop was a masculine space. Conversation topics were sports, politics, work, cars, local news, subjects considered appropriate for men talking to men. When your turn came, you'd sit in the chair and the barber would drape a cape around you, fastening it at the neck, asking what you wanted. Most men had a standard cut they always got, maybe just same as usual, and the barber would know what that meant, would begin working automatically. The clippers would buzz up the sides and back, the scissors would thin and shape the top, comb and scissors working together, hair falling to the cape in the floor, accumulating in dark drifts. The process took maybe 15 or 20 minutes for a standard cut. When it was finished, the barber would use a small brush to sweep loose hair off your neck and ears, might dust you with talcum powder, might show you the back of your head with a hand mirror so you could approve the cut. You'd stand, hand him a few dollars, $8, $10, $12 depending on the era, maybe add a tip, and leave feeling tidier, more presentable, ready to go another few weeks before needing another cut. The barbershop was community space, a place where men gathered, where you'd see neighbors and acquaintances, where local issues were discussed and opinions shared. The barber himself was often a local personality, someone who knew everyone, who'd been cutting hair for decades, who was part of the neighborhood infrastructure as surely as the corner store or the gas station. Doing your own car maintenance. Car ownership meant maintenance, and for many men, that maintenance was done at home in the driveway or garage, not at a service shop. Changing your own oil, replacing spark plugs, adjusting the carburetor, these were expected skills, things you did yourself to save money and because that's what responsible car owners did. The oil change was routine, performed every 3,000 miles or 3 months, whichever came first. You'd drive the car up onto ramps or jack it up and place it on jack stands, creating clearance underneath. The oil pan would be beneath the engine, and you'd position a drain pan under it, remove the drain plug with a wrench, and let the old oil drain out. 5 quarts of dark, dirty oil streaming into the pan, the smells sharp and chemical. While the oil drained, you'd locate the oil filter, usually on the side of the engine, and remove it, either by hand if it was loose enough, or with a special filter wrench if it was stuck. The old filter would have residual oil in it, spilling as you removed it, adding to the mess. The new filter would be installed, first coating the rubber gasket with a little fresh oil, then screwing it on hand tight. When the draining was complete, you'd replace the drain plug, making sure the washer was in good condition, tightening it properly. Then you'd lower the car, remove the oil fill cap on top of the engine, and pour in new oil. 5 quarts usually, the right grade for your engine and the season, checking the level with the dipstick to ensure it was correct. The used oil had to be disposed of properly. Most people would save it in old milk jugs or oil containers and take it to a service station or recycling center that accepted used oil. The oil change was done, the car serviced for another 3,000 miles, and you'd save the $15 or $20 that a quick lube place would have charged. Other maintenance followed similar patterns, replacing air filters, changing spark plugs, replacing windshield wipers, checking and topping off fluids, rotating tires, all things you could do yourself with basic tools and knowledge, maintaining your vehicle, keeping it running, understanding how it worked in the process. This self-sufficiency was valued, was part of being a competent adult, and fathers passed these skills to sons, teaching them to maintain their own vehicles, to be independent, to not need to rely on professionals for basic tasks. The garage became classroom, the car became textbook, the lessons were practical and hands-on, and the knowledge was useful, saved money, created confidence and capability that extended beyond just car maintenance to a general sense that you could figure things out, could fix problems, could handle what life threw at you. The rhythm of seasons. Fall yard work. Fall meant leaves, and leaves meant work. Raking them, bagging them, dealing with the endless cascade that transformed green lawns into carpets of red and gold and brown that couldn't be left there, had to be managed, had to be removed. The work was physical and repetitive. You'd rake leaves into piles, the metal or bamboo tines of the rake scraping across grass, gathering leaves into progressively larger mounds. Sometimes you'd rake them to the curb for a municipal pickup, creating long windrows along the street that would be sucked up by the city's leaf collection truck. Other times you'd bag them, large poper bags designed specifically for yard waste, or plastic bags, filling each one with compressed leaves, trying to fit as many as possible, making dozens of bags from a single yard's worth of leaves. The work took hours, sometimes days, and just when you thought you were finished, more leaves would fall and you'd have to do it again. The process repeated throughout October and November, following the tree's schedule, responding to wind and weather, an obligation that couldn't be avoided or postponed indefinitely. Some people burned their leaves, piling them in a corner of the yard or in the street and setting them ablaze, the smoke rising in gray columns, the smell of burning leaves distinctive and autumnal, a scent that defined the season. But burning became less common as environmental regulations restricted it, and bagging became the standard. Kids would play in the leaf piles before they were bagged, jumping into them, scattering them, undoing raking work, but having too much fun for adults to truly object. The leaves were a playground, a natural occurrence that provided free entertainment, and the destruction of leaf piles was accepted as part of the process. Yard work brought neighbors together. Everyone out doing the same tasks simultaneously. Conversations across property lines, borrowed tools, shared complaints about the amount of work, mutual suffering that created bonds. You'd see the whole neighborhood engaged in the same activity, a collective response to seasonal change, maintaining properties, keeping up appearances, doing what was expected. Spring cleaning. Spring meant cleaning, and not just surface cleaning, but deep cleaning, opening windows to let in fresh air after months of winter, tackling jobs that had been deferred, making the house feel new and fresh and ready for warmer weather. Your mother would organize this effort, making lists, assigning tasks, dedicating weekends to systematic cleaning of the entire house. Windows would be washed inside and out, removing winter grime, making glass clear and transparent again. Curtains would be taken down and washed or dry cleaned, dusty fabric refreshed. Carpets would be shampooed, furniture moved to clean underneath and behind, years of accumulated dust and debris addressed. Closets would be sorted, winter clothes packed away, summer clothes brought out. Everything examined to determine what was worth keeping and what should be donated or discarded. Kitchen cabinets would be emptied, wiped down, reorganized. The basement and garage would be tackled, boxes sorted, tools organized, spaces reclaimed from winter's disorder. Spring cleaning was tradition, annual renewal, the physical act of making space clean mirroring the psychological sense of fresh starts that spring provided. The work was exhausting, but satisfying, the house feeling noticeably different when it was done, cleaner and lighter and more organized. The whole family would participate, even reluctantly, because the scope of work required multiple people. You'd spend Saturday or Sunday engaged in cleaning rather than leisure, and while it wasn't fun, it was accepted as necessary, as part of the cycle of the year, as what responsible homeowners did to maintain their property and their living space. The end of an era, how everything changed. As we move through the 1990s toward the 2000s, every pattern we've described began to shift, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, as new technologies and cultural changes transformed how Americans spent their free time. The internet arrived, first through dial-up, slow and cumbersome and tied to phone lines, but even in this primitive form it offered something new, access to information without leaving home, connection to people worldwide, entertainment that was interactive rather than passive. As connection speeds increased, as always-on broadband replaced dial-up, the internet became central rather than peripheral, became the default place to look for information, to communicate, to be entertained. Video rental stores couldn't compete with Netflix and streaming, couldn't match the convenience of unlimited movies for a flat monthly fee, couldn't survive the shift from physical to digital media. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010. The local independent video stores closed years earlier. The Friday night ritual of choosing movies disappeared, replaced by scrolling through endless digital libraries, the browsing experience migrating online, the social component of being in a physical store with other customers eliminated entirely. Cell phones became smartphones, became pocket computers, became constant companions that demanded attention, that provided unlimited entertainment and communication, that filled every spare moment with content consumption. Waiting rooms, commutes, idle moments, all previously dead time, now filled with scrolling, checking, consuming. Never bored, never unoccupied, never alone with your thoughts. Social media emerged and took over, replaced phone calls with messages, replaced in-person gatherings with virtual connections, created the illusion of socializing while actually isolating people in front of screens. The mall as social destination died, unable to compete with online shopping, with Amazon delivering anything you wanted to your door in 2 days, with the convenience of never having to leave home to buy anything. Board game nights became less common as screens provided easier entertainment. Reading physical newspapers declined as news migrated online, became free, became instant, became fragmented across countless sources rather than curated by trusted institutions. Hobbies that required patience and effort, model building, photography with film, crafts, became niche interests practiced by enthusiasts rather than mainstream activities, unable to compete with the instant gratification of digital entertainment. The structure of daily life loosened. Without appointment television, without fixed programming, you could watch anything, anytime, which meant watching became less of a shared experience, less of a cultural touchstone, more of an individualized activity. Without physical media and defined spaces for entertainment, the boundaries between work and leisure, between different types of activities, blurred. The changes brought benefits, incredible convenience, access to unlimited information and entertainment, the ability to stay connected with people anywhere in the world, opportunities that previous generations couldn't imagine. But the changes also brought losses, the friction that made activities meaningful, the limitations that forced creativity, the boredom that led to discovery, the shared experiences that created community, the physical spaces that brought people together, the patience that developed through waiting, the satisfaction of creating rather than consuming. For those who lived through the transition, who remember both the analog and digital eras, the changes are profound and sometimes disorienting. The way free time was spent before the internet seems almost unimaginable now to younger people who've never known a world without instant access to everything. The patience required, the limitations accepted, the physical nature of activities, the social structures around entertainment, all of this has disappeared so completely that explaining it feels like describing a foreign country, a place that existed but no longer does. And yet, these memories persist. These experiences shaped people, created values and expectations and ways of being that don't necessarily align with how the world works now. The tension between remembering how things were and accepting how things are creates a kind of cognitive dissonance, a sense that something valuable was lost, even as something valuable was gained. This documentary has tried to preserve these memories, to document how Americans spent their free time before everything changed, to create a record of daily life that future generations might not be able to imagine but should understand. Because understanding how people lived, how they spent their time, what brought them together, and what gave meaning to their leisure hours, understanding this is understanding human experience, cultural evolution, the arc of progress and change. For those who remember, may this serve as validation that yes, this was real, this is how we lived, these memories are accurate and worth preserving. For those who don't remember, may this provide perspective on what came before, what was sacrificed in the name of progress, what was gained and what was lost in the digital revolution that transformed everything. The analog era is over. The way Americans spent their free time from the 1960s through the 1990s belongs to history now, preserved only in memory, in stories, in moments like this when we pause and look back and remember. Thank you for taking this journey with us. If these memories resonated with you, share this with someone who remembers. Leave a comment with your favorite analog era activity. Subscribe for more explorations of how Americans used to live. The internet changed everything, but before it did, this is how we spent our time, and it mattered, and it's worth remembering.